All right. House. It's on mute all the time, but now it's not getting it. Okay, there. Dino. No, Ms. Brooks. Rihanna, no. Ariana, excuse me. No, Ms. Brooks. Okay. Ms. Cortazar. Oh, okay. Cortazar is looking for blonde hair, sorry. And Ms. Dunstan. Okay. Ms. Zeppeheimer? No. Oh, Zeppeheimer with it, sorry. Ms. Busco. Okay. Ms. Gartner. Chris Cabbage? Ms. Chris Cabbage, okay. Ms. Kisner. Okay, Ms. Kisner. Ms. Kratz. Okay, good. Ms. Krawinkel Peralta. Ms. Leonard. Jewel? Oh, there you are, okay. You moved, but that's okay. Ms. Maciak. Avery Maciak. Ms. Morgan. Isabel Morgan. Mr. Paniagua, yes. Ms. Rentschler? Ms. Rentschler? No. Ms. Rentschler, Arizona? No. Okay, Ms. Raya? Ms. Swartztrauber? Ms. Shaw? Emily, oh, Shaw, okay. Mr. Slacktish? Ms. Smith? Mr. Stolzilgi? Ms. Volch? Oh, Ms. Waits? There's Ms. Waits. Mr. Decker and Mr. Marino. Miss, did I get you in the back? All the way in the back, behind. Who are you, miss? I did? What's your name? Kratz? Okay, good. Thank you, Ms. Kratz. Appreciate it. Where's the, oh, okay, so we don't have, that's what it means if we don't have the, I would have rather had the remote control, to be honest with you. Controls for this device. Okay, so now I have to figure out. Actually, I'm hoping maybe. Heck with that. Oh, it's on already. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was on. Okay. Where's okay, good. Okay. Slideshow. I don't know if I did that again. Okay. With Judaism. PowerPoint. Today I'm going to start talking about, I talked about the scriptures, or at least the sacred, I should not say the scriptures, but the sacred authorities of both the written and the oral Torah for Jews. And now I will get into some of the particular beliefs of Judaism, beginning with the most essential belief, the belief that makes Judaism unique amongst the world's religions, which is the belief in one God. Did want to show an example. Actually, before I move on from that, because I didn't give the reading from the Talmud, but actually I do, before I move on, I want to quickly show something from the Talmud. And it's in here in my other various PowerPoints. This older one on Judaism. Of course, I would pick the wrong one. much older PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. I didn't give a reading from the Talmud. That's why I thought I would show something from an old PowerPoint, just to give you a taste, an example of what it's like. And this is from, as you might see, you might know, B, Shabbat, dealing with the Sabbath, Shabbat, the seventh day of the week for Judaism, in which they rest, according to the rule or the command, the mitzvah of their God. And you can tell it's from Talmud Bavli because of the B in front of Shabbat, B Shabbat, column 36B. And this is how it looks if you translate it into English. It's concerning, we're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty, and it's much longer, the discussion is much longer than the selection I give you here, but the upshot is, what can you do or not do on the Sabbath? Well, you're not allowed to do any sort of work. So obviously that means you can't hold a job, or you're not supposed to work at a job or any sort of servile labor on the Sabbath, but it also means anything that approximates work. So for example, cooking meals in your home and stuff like that. Turning on the light switches, because that's considered like making a fire. You're not allowed to make fire, and electricity by analogy is considered a form of fire, even though it's really not, but okay, that's just how the rabbis viewed it. So there are certain things that are considered work that you can't do. So what you could do is, as a workaround, since you can't really cook, actively make a meal on the Sabbath, you can prepare things before the Sabbath and have it ready to go. Either you could, just eat it cold, prepared food, or if you wanted it warm, you can't recook it because then you're kind of like cooking a meal, but maybe you could keep it warm on the stove during the Sabbath. And that's where this question is coming in this is where the rabbis are coming in on this question. What is the Mishnah? Well, remember, the Mishnah is the oral tradition. What's the oral tradition? Cooked food may be put on a stove that's heated with straw or stubble. Okay, so you can put cooked food, already prepared food, not prepared on the Sabbath, prepared before, on a stove that has been heated. So you're not preparing the stove and making this. Remember, this is ancient days, so they have stoves, and you put fire and you put all sorts of kindling underneath that is on fire, and so it heats what's on top. Or there's an orifice where you can stick stuff in and bake things. So you can heat the stove with straw or stubble, but you shouldn't really be preparing the stove as if you were to cook. So if the stove was heated with pulp or poppy seed or with wood, which I guess in the minds of the rabbis of the oral tradition might seem like more work than just straw and stubble, you can't put food on it because it's like you're cooking. You're trying to cook something rather than just heating up something or keeping something warm. Unless the coals were taken out or covered with ashes. So there's a qualification. If the coals of the stove were taken out and covered with ashes, I guess so that you could not actively heat it, you had to use something, then I guess you could use poppy seed or wood. However, Beth Shammai, Beth is not a name here. It's not short for Elizabeth. It's the Hebrew word for house. Beth is a house. And so we would say the school. So the school of Shammai, meaning this Tana Shammai, remember the Tanaim, here we're now getting into the Tosefta, yes? Because now it's no longer the oral law, now we're getting into the sages who are interpreting how to apply this principle. So one of them is this man Shammai, very famous old Tana, ancient Tana, I should say. And Shammai says that in the latter instance, it's permissible only in the case of food that's to be kept warm. So in the latter, apparently the latter idea where you could heat it with poppy seed or wood, it's only if you're going to keep the food warm. You're not going to actually actively prepare a meal with it, but not as such as are improved by continued cooking. Why is that an issue? Because if you're warming something, you're warming it. But if you're trying to cook it more, then that could be considered work. You're no longer warming the food up, you're cooking it. The house of Hillel, Beit Hillel, says this: both are permitted. So you can put food on the stove with straw or stubble, but you can also do it with pulp or poppy seed in lieu, in case the ashes have been taken out. He says both are permitted. And here you see the essential difference between the houses of Shammai and the houses of Hillel, the houses of Shammai and Hillel, I should say. The disciples of this Tana Shammai and the disciples of this Tana Hillel. Hillel is less strict. He's more liberal in his interpretation. Both are permitted. Whereas Shammai is strict. That's how I remember the two. Hillel is happy. Do what you want. Hillel the hippie. But Shammai is strict. No, you can do one, but you can't do the other. Bet Shammai responds, food may be taken off the stove, but not put back on it. Whereas Hillel the hippie, Hillel the happy says, go for it, baby. Shalom, dude. Maybe Hillel wore tie-dye. I don't know. Maybe a tie-dye yarmulke. Maybe. But he says permits it. What does he permit? Well, that food could be taken off the stove and put back on it. Why does Shammai not permit? If I'm a Talmudic scholar and I'm trying to figure this out, I would say that Shammai, again, is thinking that by taking the food off and putting it back on, you're doing work. You're, first of all, moving the food on and off, but also it could give the impression that you are trying to recook it and not just reheat it. That's the Mishnah. The Mishnah combined with the Tanaim's commentary, usually brief commentaries, called the Tosefta. Now we get to the discussions of the rabbis who come later, the Gemara, the Amorims. The schoolmen, the Gaonim, we can ignore that for now, ask the question regarding the expression. As for the expression shall not be put, meaning the expression above that is found in the Mishnah, shall not be put. Does it refer to a pot that has been taken off the stove? Does it mean that one shall not put it back? But if it has not been taken off, it may be left there. So now this is where the academics, this is where they shine, I guess you could say. They get into distinctions. What does the Tosefta mean? Not put it back. Not put it back after you've taken it off, or just that you're not putting it back, you're leaving it there on the stove, and that's okay. Because one might be considered actively doing something and hence work, and the other is you're just not putting it back, you're leaving it there. Come in here, come in here. And this is a frequent refrain throughout the Talmud and in rabbinical teaching when the student is learning from his rabbi. The rabbi will, when the rabbi has something important to say or wants to indicate that he is about to begin his teaching, he'll say to his son, his student, come and hear, my son. So come and hear. There are two parts in our Mishnah. If the point of controversy is the leaving of food on the stove, if it was there before, the Mishnah is explained as this. On the stove that was heated with straw or with stubble, on the stove that was heated with straw or stubble, the food may be left. So they're making a distinction between the manner in which the stove is being heated. If, however, the stove was heated with poppy seed, which I guess is like oil or wood, the food may be left only if the live coals were taken out or covered with ashes. So it offers kind of an explanation, maybe one would say a clarification of what it says above in the Mishnah about the coals and being covered with ashes, what that means. Because it wasn't, when I read it, it wasn't exactly clear to me either. So the The schoolmen, the Amora, are adding their commentary to make it clear. Then they get into a question of what kind of food may be left. And they talk about the two ideas of Shammai and Hillel. Shammai says only food that's to be kept warm, but not to be cooked further, which would be making a meal. And again, our buddy Hillel is more liberal and says both. You can have food left that is both to be kept warm, but also might be improved by cooking. I wonder, if I were thinking about if I were a Jew today, I might think, well, what's food that would be improved by cooking? And maybe I might think of like canned soup or something if I had to off the top of my head. Because canned soup is already cooked. It's not raw. The vegetable, let's say you have chicken noodle soup or something. It's not raw. The chicken is cooked. The noodles are cooked. It's already prepared. And I am, I guess, kind of cooking it. I'm not just warming it up necessarily. But, that's just off the top of my head if I were thinking about it. Again, come in here. Rabbi Helbo. This abbreviation, the R period, is kind of like when you see father, FR period, in front of a priest's name, or REV, reverend, or PRES, president. So an abbreviation, Rabbi R. Helbo, in the name of Rabbi Hama Ben Gurion, quoting Rab, or Rav, who is also known as Rabbi Abba Ben Arika. And this is where the Torah kind of becomes fun and maybe could drive you neurotic way. If you were trying to, because now you're trying to figure out where's the ultimate authority, who is giving this decision. Because Helbo is giving it in the name of Gurion. Does that mean Gurion told him it, or is just giving it under the authority of his rabbi, who is Hama? And Hama was quoting Rab, who is a famous rabbi, I believe, from the school in Babylon. Who's quoting Rab? Is it Helbo? Was it Hama quoting Rab to Helbo? Or was it Helbo quoting Rab just in the name of, with the authority of his rabbi Hama? It's not clear, and that the Talmud doesn't make it clear. What does he say? The Mishnah speaks only about putting the food upon the stove, but as to putting the food into the stove, it is surely prohibited. So now whoever is talking changes the context from talking about leaving food on top of the stove to now, is it kosher, approved to put food into the stove? Surely not, says, I'll say Rabbi Helbo, surely not, etc., and so forth. And this goes on and on and on. And I use the Rodkinson translation, which is online. It's in public domain. Although, you have to be careful with it because it is a translation of the Talmud, but I have the feeling that he cuts out a lot. He cuts out things that he considers extraneous and leaves the more important conversations and discussions in. So that's what an experience of the Talmud is. And as a Jewish man, it is your life to study Torah and Talmud and to not come up with your own, not to try and solve the disagreements that you see here, but to think about the disagreements and then come to your own understanding of this is how the law is to be done. And in really difficult cases where you just have to know what to do, then you might have to go to a Jewish authority for a decision. And there are Jewish authorities for that. I was just reading, I shouldn't say I was just reading, whoopsie. The article from the New York Times, if you read it, about that came down a number of years ago, it seems to be almost 10 years ago now, actually 8 years ago, I guess, it was 2014, I think, where there was a debate about whether Jewish women could wear wigs made out of hair from the temple all the way over in India. Apparently, a lot of the hair that's used in hair wigs comes from this Hindu temple in India, where women shave off part of their hair to offer it to the god Vishnu. Well, kind of offer it to the god Vishnu. They're offering it to somebody else, but in the name of the god Vishnu. Is that considered idolatry? Jewish women are supposed to keep their heads covered. People think of Muslims when they think of head coverings. That's all you seem to see in the news. You know, some woman goes to the Division of Motor Vehicles and doesn't want to take off her head covering, and then now there's a religious liberty case before the Supreme Court or something. They say, no, you have to take off your veil, and say, no, I don't want to. It's part of my religious belief. You know, you see these kinds of stories in the news, but actually, Judaism, Orthodox Jewish women have that same issue. They're supposed to not show their hair. If you're a married woman, you're not supposed to show your hair to another. So women wear veils. But to get around that, because maybe a veil isn't seen as so becoming, women, apparently Orthodox Jewish women, will buy wigs and wear wigs instead. I did not know this, until I think maybe I saw this article or saw something about it on the internet. I had no idea that that's what was going on. I mean, I knew that older Jewish women wore wigs, but I just thought that's because they're senior citizens. They wear wigs. But no, even younger Jewish women will wear wigs, and they want the best wigs that look good. And apparently, synthetic wigs don't do the job very well. So you prefer, preferably, you want a hair wig, a wig made out of human hair. And so there's a lot of demand for hair, and they get the hair from this temple in southern India. Well, if the hair is being offered up to a god, a false god, is that considered idolatry if you wear a wig made from it? Are you supporting idolatry? And the decision came down from Israel, one of the rabbinical authorities in Israel, that yes, it was. So that's what's going on in the article from the New York Times. They're reporting on how all these Jewish women in Brooklyn were like running to the wig stores so that they could buy approved wigs that did not violate the law. I guess they could have also just covered up their heads with a veil like Muslim women do, but I guess they didn't want to do that. So the law following, sometimes you do need a decision. It's not always clear. The Mishnah or the halakha might be you have to, well, I shouldn't say it's halakha, but the command might be that you have to have your head covered if you're a Jewish woman, but how do you do that? That's the question. Okay, the Shema, the belief in one God and Israel as his chosen people. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's this famous statement called the Shema. Shema comes from the Hebrew verb shama, which simply means to listen or to hear. And it's taken from the opening words of the statement, "Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael." Therefore, it's called the Shema. Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is in the context of Moses giving a repeat of the law to the people of Israel. Is anyone interested in reading these words? Chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, actually. Is it just 4 through 9? Yeah, 4 through 9, if you're interested. Is anyone interested in reading it? Just to break the monotony? Yes? No? Deliberating? No? That's fine. Hear, O Israel! The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, and with your whole being, and with your whole strength. Take to heart these words which I command you today, I being Moses. Keep repeating them to your children. Recite them when you are at home and when you are away. When you lie down, I would say lay down, and when you get up. Bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. The Shema. Very famous statement of faith for the Jewish people. It states there the two basic ideas that I've told you about already, that there is one God and that they are his people. Hear, Israel. So it's addressed to the men and women who comprise the descendants of Jacob, Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Now, the Hebrew there is ambiguous. It could be the Lord is one, meaning he's the only God, but it can also have the meaning of he's our God alone. So you get that sense of a special election, a special chosenness of the Jewish people. He's the only God who we have to deal with, who is our God. So the Shema is the essential statement of faith, which embodies Judaism's unique view of the supernatural, i.e., that there is one personal God, that he is unique, he is no other. Unlike Brahman and Hinduism, this God is the source of reality, but he's a personal being. He's not just some impersonal force in a way, or energy, divine energy. No, how do I know he's personal? Because he is talking to these people. He's talking through Moses. Hear me, meaning, hear God. He is our God. He is your God. And this belief in monotheism, which is encapsulated in the Shema, is what distinguishes Judaism from not just the surrounding religions of its local area, but all the religions of the world. There really haven't, anthropologists have not really encountered any other historical religion that kind of finally arrived at this belief of a unique God, and there was no other God in existence. Just about every other religion, I shouldn't say just about, every other religion that we know of outside of the Jews accepted that there might be a main God that they worship, but a spirit or something, but there are other spirits and gods that were around, both good and bad. And even early Judaism had this belief. I mean, you can see this sometimes in the Bible. And it was the job of the prophets to kind of say no and remind the Jews of this belief of there's only one God and the Jews are his special people, and they should not only not worship any of these other gods that might exist, but eventually these other gods don't actually exist, and that's why you shouldn't worship them, because they're false, they're phonies. The God of the Jews is transcendent. He is above and beyond the created world, although he is present to his creation in certain ways. But the transcendence of God, I would say, is very much emphasized in Judaism, that he is separate and apart from the created world, and also Islam. Islam has a very high view of God's transcendence. He is complete. He is the complete and total source of perfection. He is preeminently perfect. And so there's nothing that he's lacking in. So compare that to, say, what we've learned somewhat about the Hindu gods, which which fight and can die in some cases, be harmed in certain cases, and yet they're gods. Okay, they're seen somehow as perfect, but they're a higher form of being. They're not the ultimately perfect, which is Brahman, which is not a god anyways. Whereas for the Jews, the ultimate divine is perfect God. He does not change. He does not feel pain or die. He's also incorporeal. So this God has no body or form, certainly not a physical form. So without a body, he's incorporeal. This God is a creator God who makes the world or brings it into order. You find both kind of views when you read the Tanakh, that God is, yes, a creator who creates by his will, but also you find kind of an older view of God as an orderer of pre-existing material. Nevertheless, God is the ultimate source, and he is good. He is good. He is holy. He is righteous. Why might that matter? Because you don't, again, that's pretty kind of a novelty about Judaism, this emphasis on the goodness of God. Not that you don't find good gods in other religions or views of a benevolent spirit, okay? But it's not necessary that the gods be good. Going back to, say, something, a religion like Hinduism, and I refer to Hinduism because it really is our only modern day example of what ancient religions were like, a long, long time ago, that still exists. And in Hinduism, the gods are good, but sometimes not. The gods will harm you if you get in their way. You have to kind of impress them to really get them to give you good things. They just don't give it willingly. And then you have the bad gods, which we could call demons, but they're these kind of very powerful spiritual beings that are by their dharma is to be bad. It's not to be good. That's the whole dharma of some of these called rakshasas or asuras, these kind of bad gods. That's their dharma, to be bad. You don't have that in Judaism. There is evil in the world, but the revelation of Judaism is that God is not the cause of it. He is completely good. So then why is there evil? That becomes a mysterious question. The second idea, the Shema, gives us the foundation for Judaism and its relationship with its God, or the God it believes in, and a basic definition of that God, that this God is one. He is the only God that the Jews are to worship. This God that's mentioned in the Shema, and actually, as I'm talking about the Shema, I'll show you a picture of something. All right. I knew it couldn't be that easy. I thought it was under T, but it's not. There we go. Oh, okay. It's opening in Paint, but big deal. You can see it, right? I'll make it a little bit larger here. No, it's too big. Okay. Yeah. Apparently, I don't have access to pictures on here or photos. Anyways, but you can see it. There is an Israeli soldier serving wherever in Israel, and the Shema. He's wearing the stuff that he's wearing on his person, and I hate this. It really stinks, but you see, he's wearing a black box on that's tied to his head, and it's also tied to his left bicep. And then there are bands of leather, black leather, that are tied around his arm. Okay, what's the connection to the Shema? Well, these are called tefillin. Tefillin, or I should say, this thing is called tefillin, and it is I say accoutrement, but I'm looking for another word other than accoutrement. It's a religious accoutrement. It's a religious thing that devout Jews will use in their prayer life when they're doing their prayers. You might see this in the synagogue if you go to like an Orthodox synagogue. I don't know if you might see it in a conservative synagogue, maybe. Probably not in a Reformed synagogue, but almost certainly I think in the Orthodox synagogue. Why? Because what's its relation? A tefillin is that black box, and the two black boxes and these bands of black leather that are used to bind the boxes to the head and the arm. Okay? Inside those boxes is a little piece of scroll on which is written the Shema, typically. In Hebrew, it has to be in Hebrew, and it's like it's a whole special thing, and that is put into the black box that is on his head and on his bicep. Why? Well, because Moses commands it. It is a mitzvah. Yes, it's a command. What does Moses say in the Shema? He says that you are to wear these words as a pendant on your forehead. Now, a pendant is kind of a jewel, and in the culture of that region, women, maybe men, but I know women would. I wonder if men would as well, I guess, would wear jewels or precious stones tie them to their heads and have them hang on their forehead. That's what a pendant is. And he says that you are to bind these words to your arm. And so observant Jews take that literally. It's not just a symbolic action. We could say, oh, that's kind of cool. It's like a symbol of the Shema, okay? Which it is a symbol of the Shema, but it's also taken literally. God says, it should be on your head, it should be on your arm. Okay, so you literally do that. You take a scroll with the Shema on it and you bind it to your arm and to your head. God also says that you are supposed to put it on your doors, and so Jews do. And if you go to an observant Jewish home, and you go to the front door, and it might be on every door, it might be on the front door, the back door, and if you really want to cover all bases, you might even find it on every door in the house, because God doesn't specify whether it's the front door, the main door, the back door. It says the doors and your gates. And you'll find something, maybe it'll be like a cylinder, but sometimes it's just a placard, okay, again, which will have the Shema written on it in Hebrew. If it's a cylinder, they'll again have a scroll with the Shema written on it. They stick the scroll kind of like a time capsule type deal, if you're thinking that way. It's not a time capsule, but, and then they put it next to the door. And you will see it, in some cases, at a diagonal. The cylinder will be at a diagonal. Why? Well, read the Shema. What does the Lord say? He commands that the Shema must be on your doorposts, but he doesn't tell you how it should be on your doorposts. Whether it should be, top to bottom or right to left. He doesn't tell you how it should be. So some Jews will put it at a diagonal, and then you cover all your bases. Because diagonal is kind of going top to bottom, but it's also kind of going right to left, isn't it? You have to be clever with the Lord, because he might catch you. But the Lord is a tricksy God. So you might see that. That thing that you will see and might see on a Jewish home and on a synagogue as well, they'll put them on synagogues, is called a mezuzah. So the Shema is a very big deal within Judaism as a statement of their faith, and they take it seriously. So this man is taking time out of his day to say his daily prayers as a Jew, and so you can't just do it. I mean, he has to have his head covered. Does he have the prayer shawl? No, he doesn't have the prayer shawl. Maybe under his shirt. But anyways, he has his head covered and he has a tefillin. Jesus was Jewish, and Jesus mentions the use of the tefillin, so that we know they've been around for a long, long time. Jesus talks about it, because in the Gospels, Jesus criticizes fellow Jews who will, make their tefillin very large, I guess for the effect of trying to show off to people, like my tefillin are larger than yours, I'm more devout than you, Notice Jesus doesn't say that his followers shouldn't use tefillin in their prayer. He just says, don't make them large like the hypocrites do, interestingly enough. Interesting. So the tefillin have been around for a while. The special people. The Jews are God's special people is epitomized by this idea of the covenant. The covenant. Now, the word covenant, which I think we might have come across already, but the word covenant simply means a contract. That's all it is. A covenant is a contract, an agreement between two or more parties. Simple. In this case, it's a contract between the God of the universe and the descendants of this man, Jacob, Israel. So when we're talking about that, we call it the covenant. And of course, when a Jewish man comes of age, at around the age of 13, reaches puberty, he becomes a son of the covenant, a bar mitzvah, which is actually kind of a combination of two words here. Bar is Aramaic, not Hebrew, but it's It's a related language. Bar means son of, and a mitzvah, as you know, is a command. So he's the son of the commandment, meaning that now this as a Jewish man, he is obligated by the commandments and the laws contained in God's covenant, his contract with the people of Israel. And this lies at the heart of Jewish religion, this belief that there is a contract or agreement between God and them. God does this first through their ancient ancestor Abraham. He gets the ball rolling, and you can see the relevant chapters in the book of Genesis if you're interested to look, 12 to 13, chapter 15, chapter 17. Basically, God, in those chapters, God keeps repeating, I'm making a covenant with you, Abraham, and with your descendants, especially through Moses, which we'll get to in a moment, or maybe I won't. Oh, I get to that later. Okay, interesting. It is with Moses especially, that the covenant comes to its, you could say, final form, because two things happen with Moses that are important for Judaism. Number one, God gives his law to Moses, and number two, he reveals his name. He reveals his name to Moses. Those are two important things. So God gives the law to Moses, but he also tells Moses who he is. The law and God's name. And that's important because apparently no one else knows God's name. No other nation, just the Jews. In the covenant, God is the Redeemer of Israel. Okay, the covenant is set within the context of the Exodus. Yes, God, I told you this before when I went over the history of Israel. You have Moses, he liberates his fellow Jews from slavery in Egypt, and along the way, going back to their homeland, God seals the deal, makes an agreement with them that as they go back to their homeland, the land of Israel, there are special rules God wants them to follow as evidence of that relationship. So God redeems Israel and he demands the observance of Torah. That's how the covenant works. If I am going to be your special God and you my special people, you have to do the things I tell you to do, basically. So it's a conditional covenant. God will give land. He promises land. He promises security. If the Jews are faithful to him and they worship him and keep his commandments, they will be blessed. But if they do not, they will be cursed. And the prophets, as I mentioned before, the job of the prophets in Israel were often to help people to toe the line, to remind people of this special covenant with their God. And they often interpreted the crises, the various problems that happened amongst the Jews, as a lack of faithfulness to the covenant. Torah had been violated, and so God was now punishing them. So think of, for example, the exile and the destruction of Solomon's temple in 587 BC. You know, that the prophets didn't see that as just, the political machinations of a great empire taking over a little one, another political thing. No, this was, which it was, but no, for the Israelite prophets, this was an act of God using a foreign power to humble us because we did not properly follow his covenant. As God gives covenants, usually, not always, there is oftentimes a sign connected with that covenant. And with these signs, we see some of the distinctive kind of rituals and holidays of the Jewish people. Circumcision. Circumcision is the cutting off of a male's foreskin. Okay, you cut around. It's not the only form of circumcision in the world, and there are all sorts of cultural forms of circumcision that have nothing necessarily to do with religion. And probably circumcision in its ancient form was just that. It was a cultural practice that became kind of religionified, became sacralized, made sacred. Nevertheless, God, the God of Israel, uses that and says to show physically in your physical bodies that you are my people, your male children must have the foreskin cut off. And this requirement arises right at the beginning with Abraham. God tells Abraham to circumcise his children, and not just his children, but even his male slaves. That must have been happy when, when the slaves found out, hey, I just thought I needed a job, now you got to tell me I got to do this. Anyways, so circumcision was a sign of the covenant with Abraham. What are the promises? God will make Abraham a great nation with a lot of children, a lot of descendants. And God promises him land, the land of Canaan that he was living in, Palestine, Israel today. And finally, he says that he will make Abraham a blessing to the world, whatever that means. God doesn't specify. For Jews, that they, from what I understand, at least from what I read and kind of hear, from Jews talking about this, I think their understanding of a blessing to the world is that through their faithful observance of Torah, they bring God's favor to the world. Not that everyone has to do it and become a Jew, but just through their faithful observance in the world, they are kind of like a light to the nations, a sign of God's goodness to the world. And that way they're a blessing. So circumcision is the sign of one of the signs of the covenant. With Moses, you have a number of things. Moses, it's established clearly that God is the only God of the Jewish people, that the Jews are supposed to be faithful in following the law that he gives them. God promises victory over their enemies, okay? So they're going back to their homeland, no need to promise land again, but there are people there who might not want them there, so they have enemies. So God promises victory over their enemies as part of this covenant with Moses. He promises them peace and prosperity or a curse, whether they follow his rules or they don't. And with Moses, we see the establishment of a sacrificial system, a temple, a concern about, well, clean and unclean things, and that's where we get into kashrut. But before I get to kashrut, actually, I'm going to talk about something else first. I'll get to kashrut eventually, not now. So what are some of the signs of this covenant? Well, kashrut, the system of clean and unclean food, but kosher extends not just to food, but also to the whole lifestyle of living a clean lifestyle. And there are practices that certain things you should do or should not do that can make you ritually unclean, but mostly it seems to regard food. Sabbath observance is emphasized. You don't really see that, well, you don't see that at all with Abraham, actually. It's with Moses that the idea of the seventh day of the week is to be a day of rest in imitation of their God. And the Passover, which is not on the PowerPoint, but should be. I think I have it here somewhere. Wrong again, Mr. Dunn. Oh, I can't go back. Thank you. Bored. There you go. Passover, which is a Jewish festival which celebrates the historical event of the Exodus. Passover. Passover. What did I say? Jewish festival. Festival which celebrates, remembers the historical event of the Passover. Event of the Passover. In Hebrew, it's called Pesach, which means exactly what the English word is, to pass over. Pass over. Why is it called the Passover? Because when God, in the process of God freeing the Jews from the Egyptians, he, on one night, one evening, God, the Spirit of God, I should say, or maybe an angel or something, but passes over the whole land, the nation of Egypt, killing the firstborn of the Egyptians, both man and beast. Okay. Why does he do this? He does this to punish the Egyptians because they would not let his people leave. They wanted to keep them there so they could work for them. And he does this, and this is the final straw. This is the final thing that motivates the Egyptians to finally tell the Hebrews, the Jews, to get out, go away. You know, your God is just causing too much trouble for us. So God passed over the nation, judging. Even in the book of Exodus, it says he judged the gods of Egypt. Oh, that's interesting. So the text is meant to show that God is such a great God, even the powerful gods of the Egyptians were judged by him. So he kills the firstborn supposedly kills the firstborn according to the story. And so the Jews are allowed to go. They are finally liberated. There's more to the story than that happens after, but that's why it's called the Passover. And so the Passover celebrates this. It is the best known of all Jewish festivals, and is celebrating their deliverance. And so Jewish families, it's not celebrated at the synagogue, it's celebrated in the home. And there will be there is a service called a Seder. A Seder. The Seder just means, it's called the Passover Seder, but a Seder is just any order of service. So if you go to Mass, the Mass is a Seder. Any order of service, or worship service or prayer service, is a Seder. And that's all it is. And there's nothing special about it for Passover. It's just a Hebrew word. The orders in the Mishnah, the 6 orders, are called the Shisha Sedarim, the 6 orders. Okay, so there's nothing necessarily connected with Passover, but it's called the Passover Seder. And what happens is the family gathers around. There's a special meal. Certain foods have to be eaten. Roasted, or I don't know if it can be boiled, but like roasted lamb. Certain herbs are eaten. Songs are sung, and the story of the deliverance is retold. There's a point during the performance of the Passover that the youngest child will turn to the father of the house and say, "Father, why is this night the most special of all nights?" And that is the cue for the father then to retell the story of the Exodus. And so and it's much more than that. There are all sorts of other things, all sorts of symbolism that goes on. One of the symbols is that you'll leave a glass of wine on the table or near the table, with a vacant chair for Elijah, this great prophet Elijah, who it is believed will be the herald, the one to proclaim the coming of the Messiah. And so there's an indication of that messianic belief that the Messiah is yet to come, and they're leaving a place for him. So if Elijah knocks on the door to a Jewish house, you don't know which house he's going to go to. So every Jew has to be prepared on the Passover, So you got to make sure that there's some wine for him and there's a chair ready for him, depending, he might come to your house. I forget if I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, but that they also open the front door to look for Elijah, or open the door so he can come in. That might be part of it. I thought I read that somewhere, but I could be wrong. Nevertheless, a place is left for him. And if I remember also correctly, on each Sabbath, there is some chair left for the prophet Elijah. So this belief kind of is recurring throughout the whole year, every week. So the Passover. Then there is, and the Sabbath I mentioned, and we saw from the Talmud, so I don't really think I need to go any more into that. You can see, the Sabbath is a day when you do not work, and it's meant to show their devotion to their God. The kashrut system of clean and unclean I'll talk about later. I want to move on to King David. King David is another one that God makes a covenant with. And there are 3 places actually where this covenant is stated. One of them is in the 2nd book of Samuel, chapter 7. So 2 Samuel chapter 7, but actually that story is repeated in 1 Chronicles 17. The 1st book of Chronicles 17. And the books of Chronicles are kind of interesting because they're actually repeats. They're repeats of material from the books of Samuel and the books of Kings. Someone came later, another person, and kind of retold the history, but with his own agenda, interestingly. So we have it repeated in 1 Chronicles 17 and in Psalm 89. And there are scholars who think that actually Psalm 89 is probably the original, or is close to what the original covenant was with David, a statement of what that covenant is. I think I might have put that in the readings for you. But what is it? Well, basically, it's important because of its relationship to the Messiah. This is where God says there's a covenant with Abraham, there's a covenant with Moses, but here there's something different. God is making a covenant with David himself and with his descendants, his kingly royal descendants, that your throne, David, will never end. Which is weird because it does end, yes, in 587. When the kingdom of Judah is destroyed and the Jews are exiled. So it does end. So how can it be that God promises that David's reign will last forever? That means someone's coming. And this person, the Messiah. And if you do the reading from Mishneh Torah, from Maimonides, this man Maimonides in Mishneh Torah, that section is discussing this whole idea of how there were certain parts of prophecy, and one part is directed towards the covenant with David, but then there's another part that's like a second part that Maimonides sees as pointing forward to the King Messiah, as he calls him. So David is where we get this idea of a Messiah, this kingly figure who will continue David's kingdom forever. So that gets attached to it. And a new covenant from Jeremiah, you can ignore that on the PowerPoint because I'm not going to talk about it. And I do want to say one last thing about Shabbat. Why, just one more thing about Shabbat. I'll actually give you the definition because I will ask it as a definition. What is Shabbat? It is, well, I give it right there. I give it right there on the PowerPoint. The word Shabbat means 7, so it's the 7th day. But why, and this is my last point, why is Shabbat important? What's the reason for it? It's more than just God says so, but it's because God rested on the 7th day. God creates over 6 days, and on the 7th day, he is finished with his work. He sees it's very good, it's good and very good, and so he rests from his work, okay? And then creation just goes on its way. That is why Sabbath is observed. It's not just simply, well, we need a day off. There's a religious significance of why it's being observed and why it's so important for Jews. Okay, God bless you all. I'll see you in a week. I hope you have a wonderful spring break and a healthy one and a safe one. God bless you all. Yes, Miss Kisner.
Yeah. So for the works cited, or if you like cite, I mean.
Oh, hold on. Something excited? What?
For the works cited.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want it in like any sort of format, like APA, MLA?
I prefer Turabian or Chicago manual style. However, it doesn't really matter because I don't require it. As long as you follow consistently a certain form,
Okay.
then that should be fine. Okay.
Okay.
As I say, I don't require you to use outside references, but if you do, you have to make sure you cite them properly.
Yeah, I'm just citing the book, so.
The textbook?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Yes, so just make sure you cite it properly.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, miss. Thank you. Okay, what does this say? Computer is totally operated by this control. The system was updated today. Okay. I know why I didn't get through. Well, because I talked about the Talmud. So. I mean, a student came late to see me in my office. And I know I should have just cut it off and said, look, I got to get over here. But I didn't. So I came late. And in the midst of that, Murphy's Law, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Actually, there's the Dunn corollary. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong at exactly the time you don't want it to go wrong. That's the Dunn corollary, Dr. Dunn. My suspenders, the suspenders came off on the back, so I'm running over here. Actually, they're still not on right, but I put them on. So I'm running over here late. I had other things that I wanted to show, but oh well. It's Lent, so I'm suffering.